what happened with the sanctions that were created and applied mostly by the United States, but with its European allies by and large, against Russia, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine back at the end of February of this year. Those sanctions, often referred to as the mother of all sanctions, because they were bigger and more comprehensive even than Mr. Trump's sanctions against China, which were the biggest we had ever seen at that point. These were promised to bring Russia to its knees, basically to destroy the Russian economy or so badly weaken it that the Russians would reconsider, end their invasion, and take their troops and tanks and all the rest back across the border from which they had come. And much of the media continued to talk about all these things that were promised to happen by all the experts that the government called in and that were in front of the media. Most of the mainstream media continues to talk, as if all of this was working pretty much according to plan. Well, it isn't. If you have the time to take a look at publications outside the United States, you would already know that. But what I'm wanting to bring to you is a publication that represents all of this, quite honestly, from inside the United States. The publication is called Business Insider. You can find it on the internet quite easily. And if you look up the edition of August 28th of this year, you will find out that the sanctions have failed. The experts were wrong. That's a quote from the article. The experts were wrong. So let me review what I learned from this article. The sanctions involved imposing a blockade. The United States, Western Europe were to stop buying Russian oil and gas. They froze the sanctions, about half of the reserves Russia has deposited in Western banks as a backing for their currency. They blocked Russians from using the SWIFT and other international payment systems that are the lifeline of buying and selling in the international market. No less experts than the two leading banks, probably in the United States, J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs, said the Russian economy would immediately collapse. It didn't. In fact, it shrank after March of this year, that is, after weeks of the invasion had happened. It shrank less after the invasion than it shrank when COVID hit 2 years earlier in March of 2020. The ruble, the currency, which did take a dive immediately after, is now worth more in international currency exchange than it was before the Russians invaded. In other words, the Russian invasion has made their currency more valuable. The Russians are earning more money in trade around the world today, 6 months after the invasion, than they did before the invasion. Yes, Europeans are buying less oil and less gas from Russia than they did, and that might have hurt Russia if no one else had been found to buy from Russia the oil and gas, etc., that the Europeans and the Americans were no longer buying. But the mistake of the experts was not understanding that the Russians could, and indeed they have, found alternative buyers. All over the world, Russia has not collapsed, not even close. All the experts who said it would in the government, right up to Mr. Biden himself, and in the leading experts the government relies on, such as the top bankers at Goldman Sachs and J.P. Morgan, they were all wrong in what they thought would happen. The inflation, which was already there before the Russians invaded, and which the war itself didn't do much to make worse, was worsened by the sanctions. It's really the sanctions that shook up world trade and that shook up the world's economies, not the war, the sanctions.